in 2008, Mike Bartlett, my platoon sergeant, invited me to the Sergeant's Major Academy at Fort Bliss to pin E9 on him. Unequivocally the proudest moment of my Army career, and I don't think, it's unlikely that in the next 1 to 7 years anything will surpass that.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. On this episode, we hear the combat story of Jordan Becker, active duty Army Lieutenant Colonel, Foreign Area Officer and Green Beret, during his time as a rifle platoon leader in the 173rd in Iraq, which included one of the last mass tactical static line parachute jumps in a combat, and leading Special Forces ODA teams in 10th Group in multiple theaters. Enjoy. Hey Jordan, thanks for taking the time to chat today and share some of your stories. It's great to see you again.
Thank you, Ryan.
So the last time we were together was, I think we were saying 2014 in Paris, but before that we'd been in college together. You were, I think, 2 years ahead of me in the ROTC program at Georgetown. You graduated in the pre-9/11 timeframe and then went out to an infantry unit. But before we even jump into that, I have just one question I wanted to ask you, true or false. You were in the last known combat parachute jump static line that the Army has. Is that true or not?
I don't know if it was the last known static line combat jump. I think there may have been other small ones in Afghanistan that maybe the Ranger Regiment did. I think it probably was the last one, but I'm not actually positive that that's the case.
It might be the last declassified one or something to that effect, or large scale conventional.
Yeah, probably the last mass tactical. Yeah.
And was that your first combat experience? Was that movement in?
Yeah, definitely. Because I got to Vicenza it was like a year after I got there. Like I just finished up my line platoon leader time. So
And so I'm just curious, like in a nutshell, in your mind as you're in that aircraft getting ready to jump out, and this is like the first combat anybody had ever really seen at this point for conventional units. What was going through your head in the aircraft?
Well, some quick memories about it in the aircraft. I was the support platoon leader for my battalion. So my platoon wasn't actually jumping. It was just me and my platoon sergeant. And the platoon air landed, like 12 hours later or something.
Wow.
With all the vehicles and stuff. So I was in like a weird chalk, like an odd assortment of people. And my chalk leader was this guy, Bill Osland, who was a really well-known and well-respected guy around the Army. And he was, I think, the S3 of the other battalion, the S3 of our sister battalion. And then I remember there was an Air Force full colonel who was sitting across. It was my first jump ever out of a C-17, so it was a much more comfortable ride than I was used to.
Yeah,
it was really fast. When we took off from Italy, it took I think it took like 2 hours or something to fly from Italy to the DZ. And there was a guy. So Bill Osland was from the other battalion, and so he had like those rubber, go faster glasses, and he had camouflage face paint. And our battalion didn't do camouflage face paint. And then there was this Air Force colonel who didn't even have a weapon. He had he didn't even have a rucksack. He had like a little sort of day pack kind of thing. And he was reading a novel that had a picture of Flavio on the cover of it. So it was a really strange gamut of levels of seriousness about what we were doing. I feel like I was pretty the briefings we've been given and the way we sort of prepped everything. Like the drop zone looked like I expected it to look. I mean, it felt just like a training jump, but not training. But everything sort of, there wasn't a lot of confusion about what was going on. Like we had been well briefed about the situation, I think.
But you guys weren't jumping into contact, were you?
No, and actually one of the Mike Davis was the SF pilot team leader that had infiltrated via Turkey, and his team had set up the drop zone and coordinated with I think it was PDK Peshmerga to ensure the drop zone was secure. They cut off all the electricity around the area, so it was well prepped. It wasn't like Operation Market Garden or anything like that.
Got it. Okay, well, that was one of the things on my mind, just having looked back at your experiences. So just briefly, if we take it back to our time in college, you had graduated in 2001, but before 9/11 happened, like you were out. So you truly joined in the pre-9/11 era. You went into actually into service pre-9/11, and then 9/11 happened. So just curious, kind of where were you at the time with 9/11 and what was going through your mind then?
I was in IOBC, and it was really interesting. So I was like the platoon leader we were out in the field, and I was the platoon leader, and my friend Mark Brzezowski had been bitten by a brown recluse spider, like on his scrotum. So he was sent back to like recover and have his bite, I don't know, the venom drained or whatever you do with the spider bite. And I was a platoon leader, and this guy, Lasha Baridze, who's a wonderful guy and ended up being the deputy Chad of Georgia, had lost his nods. So they had called other companies out into the field, and we were, online walking around the field looking for nods. And then we got word that there had been these attacks. And I remember Lasha and I were the only guys at I did the honors thesis seminar with Charles King my senior year, and my partner was this dude, Evan Coleman, who later became like a Fox News terrorism guy. And his thesis was on what he called the Arab Afghans, which was basically like Al-Qaeda returning to Algeria and Egypt, Morocco, returning to the Maghreb, basically, after the war in Afghanistan. So I was kind of familiar, like academically, and sort of passing away from reading Evan's work with like this scenario. And I remember Lasha and I were the only two guys. everybody was like ready to go to wherever the hell this place was and kill all these people. And Lasha and I were the only two weirdos who were like, well, man, got the Taliban have a QRF. Maybe we could just go do a few missions, call it good. It was strange. It was a really strange time.
And then, so after that happened, like how much more training did you have for IOBC? Because you probably had that. I imagine you had follow-on training as well.
Yeah, so I think I finished IOBC like in November, and then I graduated from Ranger School in March. Our jump into Iraq was exactly 1 year after I graduated from Ranger School. So I graduated from Ranger School, it was like end of March of 2002. Went straight to Italy, did my thing there for a year, and then.
Did you feel like you guys, since you were in Italy, did you feel like you were going to miss out on Afghanistan?
I was not concerned about missing out on anything in any way, but I do remember. You may not remember, but I put Italy as my first choice when we were finishing up with ROTC, and everybody in the Hoya Battalion was like, you'll never go to Italy. That's only for, I don't know, whoever, some other people. But I knew, the three components, right? Like I knew I was pretty high on the order of value. I thought I had a good chance to go there. But I didn't find out about it until, I knew I was going to Europe, but I knew I had a good chance of going to Italy, but I was waiting to find out specifically because it said like I was going to the replacement detachment in Germany or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And then I finally got word, I think during like, we had a Christmas exodus from Ranger School. And my orders, I got pinpoint orders to Vicenza. So when I graduated, I called the branch dude from Florida just to make sure like, hey dude, you didn't like give my slot away or anything, did you? And he was like, hey, listen, I think you should go to Fort Riley. They're next in the chute for Afghanistan. It's Big Red One. And, you know, you're slotted to go to this new battalion. They're just standing up in Italy. You're going to miss the war. And I was like, dude, I'm totally not going to miss the war. It was the first time that I ever like bucked the authority of somebody in the Army. And I was like, no, thank you. Like you're playing games with me. I'm going to go to Italy. Thank you very much. And I will not miss.
Dang. That's super interesting. Okay, I wonder if was he just trying to fill a slot in Big Red One, you think? Or was he looking out for you, trying to get you
Probably,
into
or he may, yeah. I mean, I don't think, I try not to assume people are up to nefarious things, but he certainly had some reason that was not in my best interest to try to peddle that to me.
So I think since I had known you, I would never have guessed you would go on any other branch besides infantry, but I'm just curious why you ended up taking that path.
Well, because I mean, it was kind of weird for me to be in the Army. I didn't really expect to be in the Army until I get to college. But after I started learning about what the Army did, it seemed like being in the infantry was like what kind of like what the Army did. So if I was going to be in the Army, I figured I should be in the infantry.
Got it. So it doesn't even sound like it was a tough decision for you.
No. And I remember on the branch preferencing thing, I did something, it probably wasn't that clever in retrospect, but I put infantry as my first choice. And then I put aviation as my second choice, but I didn't take the aviation physical. And then I put not medical services corps, but like the medical corps, like for doctors only as my third choice. I thought, well, I'm not a doctor. I haven't passed the aviation physical, so they'll have to branch me infantry, which they probably could have just branched me AG and, sent me not where I went. But
yeah, that's sneaky. Okay. And then just briefly before we move on to your to the time in the units, I'm curious, just like why did you join up to serve anyway? Because you just mentioned like the Army wasn't really a thing for you until you were in college. For a lot of people, it's kind of like a family tradition, or there's something else that compels them in. But what was it for you, especially in the pre-9/11 era?
The person who's now my wife, we were kids together. She's a year older than me. She left California to go to Georgetown. She became convinced during her freshman year at Georgetown that Georgetown would be a great place for me. She didn't actually like it that much, but she, I think, correctly determined that it was like an ideal place for me to be. Mm-hmm. But like I was planning to go to UC school for free. Georgetown was expensive. I was like, that's a funny idea. How should I pay for that? But she was, the summer after her freshman year, she went to this language immersion program that Georgetown put on. And one of her teammates in that program was this dude who was like, he was like his grandfather had been like one of the originators of the UDT SEAL program. His father was a Vietnam SEAL, and he was like, gonna be a SEAL. So Lauren was like, the Navy SEALs will pay for college. You're good at sports and like the outdoors. I'm sure they'll want to pay for your college. I didn't even know the difference between the Army and the Navy. So I went down to the like supply room down there where Wayne Bailey worked.
Yeah.
He was in there drinking his coffee. I was basically like, hello, I'm here for the Navy SEAL scholarship program. And he was like, but GW was too far for me to go. The mornings were early anyway. So I just stuck with the Army. And I remember like going to the first meeting and somebody asked me like, are you are you an MS1 or an MS4 and I thought, well, what's the lowest one? And I did the opposite. I can't even remember now which one was but basically I said like, I am the battalion commander.
Oh man. So man, what did your family think of you signing up at that time?
I think my mom didn't like it very much. My dad thought it was cool. Purportedly, my great aunt Frances said, "The army, oh, such a nice boy, such a handsome boy. What a shame." But
and then you go into the infantry and SF like down the road. How crazy is that? Okay.
Yeah, I figured that was what, like I said, that was what you're supposed to do in the army.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me fast forward to when you're in the 173rd and you're in Iraq. If you can kind of take me through the first time you're actually going out on a mission where you could be in contact, you're gearing up. Like, what role were you in? It sounds like you had rotated out of the main platoon leader role and you were possibly transitioning at the time, or if not, just correct me there. But I just want to know, like, you were on the very front end of that war where so many other people had not seen combat at all and had just studied it for so long. So put me in your shoes at that time as a lieutenant getting ready to go into the first time.
So I had the support platoon leader actually got fired right before the Iraq trip. I was expecting to go. So my platoon sergeant and I were both running up on the end of our line time, and I was expecting to go to the scouts together with him. But they decided to fire the support platoon leader, just leave 2 E7s in the scouts and send me to the support platoon. And it was super, that was probably the coolest job I've had in the Army. I loved it. And so I guess the jump was I felt like it was very clear to me that what the drop zone was going to look like, and that it wasn't, like we weren't going to get any gunfights on the drop zone. I don't think that was absolutely clear to everybody. And then I remember we just kind of vegetated on the drop zone for like a while. But I took the Kurdish phrase book they gave us seriously. So I was like the dude that knew like 15 words of Kurdish. So I could always go, like, I got all this freedom just because I could, communicate in the most rudimentary fashion with people. And then I became known to them as like the dude that could, was willing to try to communicate with them in their language. And then I became known in my unit as like the dude that could, it was like a mutually reinforcing phenomenon that involved very little effort or skill on my part, but just being, like 0.1% beyond the next dumbest guy in the unit.
Right.
So I started like on the drop zone, I was just like going all over the place and getting stuff and bringing stuff to the unit and getting food, getting all kinds of different things. And then when we got to Kirkuk, I was supposed to be like liaising with SF or something, but then there wasn't much to do there. And they had this thing where the Army Corps of Engineers was trying to get the North Oil Company functioning again. Mm-hmm. But there was nobody to work there because all the people that worked there were sort of, like low to mid-level Ba'ath Party members, because it was like a government job and you got to swear fealty to the dictator to have one of those. So the Kurds that came down with us were like, you Ba'athist sleaze balls, get the hell out of here. so they basically did like a reverse ethnic cleansing of the government housing for oil company employees in Kirkuk. But the Kurds that replaced these oil company employees like didn't know how to make an oil company work. So the Corps of Engineers asked the brigade, "Hey, can you like get these people out of here?" And the brigade asked the battalion asked the company asked me. I asked my RTO, he said no. And then so it was this thing, they called it Team Repo. So it was like me and like some dudes from the mortar platoon and the other battalion, and these two SF guys who were then civil affairs guys. And basically it was like it's a long and complicated story that there's a little blurb on it in Assassin's Gate that George Packer wrote in like 2004, 2005. But that was like my first autonomous, like I got to, produce my own plan and knock out my own. That was probably like in April of 2003. So we've been there for like a month before.
And in that case, like, were you guys in a movement? Like, did you have to go in an area where you were potentially going to get in contact, or this was kind of like the first time you had a mission you controlled, but it wasn't engaging anyone?
Well, so it was, nothing, there wasn't ever, like, I don't think I ever in OIF-1 got a mission like, hey, go conduct a raid or go, it was all sort of, I guess we did, but we did raids at like a battalion level. Like I never ran anything. Everything kinetic was more centrally controlled. We just had like our little role to play as a platoon. So yeah, we do like these long convoys down to places and go like do whatever we did and come back and give ourselves medals. No, that one. So I like for a while when we got to Kirkuk, nobody was really allowed to leave the wire. But I got like special dispensation with the guy, my former platoon sergeant who became the scout platoon sergeant. He spoke Turkish and they thought I spoke Kurdish. So the two of us just got to like, so we basically kind of like merged the support platoon and the scout platoon, and the two of us got to kind of like wander around, doing stuff.
That's crazy that they were kind of intending to split you two, and then you still ended up coming back together. In the end.
And actually, my very most proud moment in the Army was that in 2008, Mike Bartlett, my platoon sergeant, invited me to the Sergeant's Major Academy at Fort Bliss to pin E9 on him, and I was the only officer in the inner sanctum of Sergeant Major Landia.
That's awesome.
Unequivocally the proudest moment of my Army career, and I don't think it's unlikely that in the next 1 to 7 years anything will surpass that moment.
Is he still in or no?
No, he joined the Army in I think 1990, like right before the Gulf War. And I remember he was planning to do 20, but I think he really liked, I think he liked being a sergeant major. And he just retired maybe a year ago.
Wow. Okay. Jeez. And he did all that time in the infantry, basically.
Yeah. He was in maneuver units. Like, I don't think he ever, he was, he was in 275, and then he was a drill sergeant, and he came, I think, no, he did drill sergeant duty, then 275, then he came to Italy. And he stayed in Italy for a really long time, as some people are wont to do. And then he did all, like, he was, he did all his sergeant major time in maneuver units. I don't think he ever had like a trade off like that.
It's hard. That's hardcore. Okay. Let's, if you can, let's jump to to your transition out of 173rd? Because I'm assuming at some point you had to kind of commit to going this SF route.
Yes.
Maybe before you go to the career course. So
Yeah.
what helped you take that decision? Was it some of the people you were with in OIF? Was it someone else you knew, or just you found this path on your own?
There's definitely people. It was not the two SF guys that I worked with in OIF1 because they were very good. But a few things. So basically all my squad leaders went to selection. From my team leaders from my line platoon, like the guys I was closest with, they all went to the scouts with Mike, and then they went to selection. Well, those are guys I like to work with. I'd like to work there. And then Mike, I remember, told me, I was, thinking, well, I'll probably get out of the Army. And he's like, well, look, man, like, you're a strange bird in the Army. Like, you did great here. You're a little on the weird side of here, and this is a little on the nerdy side for you. If you go to some mech unit somewhere, like, you're going to be square peg in a round hole. But don't leave the Army until you've tried SF. Just go try SF, because I think you'll really like that. So he gave me good advice, and other people gave me good advice too. And I kind of knew it was like the right thing for me. So I decided. I had decided I was going to do it, I think, even before OIF1. But OIF1 gave me a lot more confidence. Like, I always felt like an odd bird in the Army, but I felt like I did really well in Iraq and got a lot of recognition for doing really well. It gave me a lot of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I put in my packet. I probably put it in my packet like right before OIF or maybe even during OIF. And then I just did all the final stuff after, and I went to selection. So people at that time were going to selection in order so you would PCS from your unit to Fort Bragg, go to selection, and then either go straight to the Q course, or if you failed, go through another PCS to somewhere else. But apparently people were like trying to avoid deployments by PCSing to selection and then failing or something. So it was perfect for me because they made it mandatory to go to selection, TDY, and return. So I went to selection, passed, came back to Italy. The battalion XO was a really wonderful guy who I got along really well with. So he made me his deputy XO for the prep for Afghanistan. So I did all the RFI logistics for that. And then the battalion deployed. My very good friend, who actually, instead of going to selection, he went to CIA. He was a rear D commander. So I had 6 weeks of kind of screwing off between selection and going to the Q course.
Was that tough for you, like seeing the guys deploy again to Afghanistan and then knowing you were going a different route?
Yeah. But it was, so I made a point of going hard until the end and contributing as much as I could until the end. There was another guy who was in the unit with me who basically I remember if you were going to be on rear D, you wore woodland BDUs. And if you were going on the deployment, you wore desert ACUs or DCUs, or whatever the hell, like a combat outfit and a not combat outfit. And this dude was like, man, we went to selection together. He was like, fuck you guys. I'm going to go be a Green Beret. I'm putting myself on rear D, put on his woodland outfit and make checked out. And I just I knew I wasn't going, but I worked hard at what I was doing till the end. And then when I came back from selection, then everybody was gone and it was it's kind of screw off time.
Yeah. So I want to get into the ODA stuff, but just quickly, I don't want to gloss over something just because I know you and you're a very humble person, but you mentioned that you had done really well in Iraq. What gave you that feeling like, what was it that you felt like you did really well that set you up when you were in that kind of lieutenant role in Iraq?
I think I was just the weirdness of it. There were things like this team Repo mission, weird, like there was a problem with like LPG distribution that the boss came to me to solve. Like I became like a go-to person to solve sort of difficult emerging problems. I feel like my bosses respected and appreciated me for that. Whereas, before I was just like a dude, there were a bunch of lieutenants and, like who's the best lieutenant? I don't know, the tallest guy or the guy with the shiniest shoes or the guy that gets a 390 instead of a 360 on his APFT. But that Iraq trip was really like, I had a lot of opportunities to improvise and to develop my own solutions. I got a lot of autonomy from my bosses, and it was quite it was rewarding.
Yeah, I got you. That makes sense. Okay, then, so if we fast forward selection, and I just want to spend a minute here because I don't know the SF world the way many people do. If I understand it correctly, selection is kind of the beat you down, hell week or month or whatever time frame, and then Q course is kind of the still out in the woods, but the more formalized training process where you've made it past the hard part. Is that generally accurate?
Yeah, I think there would be more attrition in selection than during the Q course. Yeah, definitely.
And and selection is how long?
It's like 3 weeks.
How does that stack up in terms of like demand on you physically and mentally compared to Ranger School?
I was at a totally different place in my life. Like I felt super comfortable and at ease at selection. It was probably objectively harder than Ranger School, but in Ranger School, I was still worried that like I wasn't, like I didn't belong in the Army, or like I didn't have like the right skill set or upbringing or whatever to succeed in the Army. And by the time I was at selection, like I basically just I knew I came to selection like really physically well prepared. And I knew that there was an intellectual and emotional and a psychological component, and I felt very comfortable and confident about that. I figured, like all I can do is come in at my physical best, and it was hard, but I felt very comfortable about it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so you come out of selection, you went back to 173rd, then assume you do your time at the career course, and then you go to the Q course. Is that kind of the progression?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
So how do they determine the assignment for what group you go to?
When I was going through this process, I was not very impressed with how they figured all that stuff out. I think in theory, it would be based on your D-Lab score. They would identify the language that you would be suited for, or that you would have the ability to acquire well. And then they would assign you based on, language, regional experience, life background, interests, whatever. I don't think that was the case when I was going through. I remember my wife had just come back from Japan. My brother-in-law was like a Southeast Asia political economist. So I thought, well, I'll like orient myself toward Asia. So I picked 110 or 11 as my first choice. So the battalion of first group that's in Okinawa. And then first group Maine at Fort Lewis as my second choice. Then 110 in Stuttgart as my third choice. And then 10th Maine in Colorado Springs, my fourth choice. And it was really the only time in the Army that I did not get my first choice. They gave me my fourth choice, which was Carson. I'm really glad that that came to pass. But during I remember, so everybody learned Arabic because like, even though, the soft truth is, you can't produce SF in response to a crisis. You can't mass produce SF. They were just trying to mass produce Arabic speakers during the high point of Iraq. So basically, I mean, the first group guys went to, most of them did Tagalog or Indonesian. I don't actually know anybody that did. I knew one guy that did Mandarin, but he went before my time. But most of us were in Arabic. I remember there was a dude who was a guardsman who's going on active duty, and somehow like he was going to fifth group because like his uncle lived there or something, and he couldn't learn Arabic. And the D-Lab told the Army he couldn't learn Arabic. He got like a 75 on the D-Lab, which I think he had to get a waiver just to be in SF, let alone learn Arabic. And he was just not capable of learning Arabic. And the class moved at that pace, and then it was just, that was a mess. But yeah, I don't know that there was a lot of, my impression was that there was not a lot of careful consideration given to who went where.
Okay. And you took Arabic as well?
Yeah, well, actually, they put me in French to begin with. And I think that was a scam. They knew I had a 3.3, and I think the CG at that time was revolutionizing how the Q course worked. And one of the things he was doing to revolutionize it was, instead of giving people, 6 months to a year to learn language, he was having you do it just on the weekends during the other training. So during your MOS training, weekends. So we just come in every Saturday and learn language. That was it didn't work. So my French teacher was a Moroccan lady, and like we started in class and she was like, "You speak French. What are you doing here?" I was like, I don't know. She's like, "Well, what do you want to do?" I was like, "I want to learn Arabic." And she's like, "Okay, we'll go." I was like, "I have my Rosetta Stone. They told me I was going to do Arabic before." So I just went to the computer lab and started doing Arabic. And like the E7 that was in charge of our formations or whatever saw me in there and was, a wise and reasonable E7, was like, "Well, it's dumb that you're in French. It's dumb that you have to learn Arabic on your own. Let's just put you in Arabic class." So I ended up joining an Arabic class, but it was crazy. I mean, I had guys like this dude I told you about that didn't have the wherewithal to do it. It was half officers, half engineers, and our FTXs didn't overlap with one another. So half the class would be gone, and then the other half, and then we'd have to start over where everybody else was. And then the general would come in on Saturday morning, and he didn't like to see students in his school, so he'd have to like scrape all the tape off the walls and leave. So I like the number of contact hours that people got was very low. And then what ended up happening is nobody passed the DLPT except me. So I was the only officer in my Robin Sage group. Yeah. And they took all the officer lane walkers and made them team leaders. So I was evaluated by an E7 at Robin Sage, which is fine. But it was... Yeah, so that was not I have a lot of good things to say about the SF training pipeline, and selection in particular was really well orchestrated and run. But that whole like developing of language and regional expertise during my period, I think it's gone through ups and downs, but during my period, it was not really very well managed, I don't think.
So you, if I'm understanding this clearly, you did pick up Arabic.
No, I mean, I passed the test, but like really, really marginally. I think I got like a 1+.
Okay. Still. And that's not a long time that you guys had. From what I had seen, the amount of time that you have for language for the Q course just seemed pretty short.
We had no time. That was the crazy thing about this period. It was Saturdays. I can't remember how many weeks, but it was basically like, it was basically like 20 Saturdays or something. It was not an adequate
for Arabic.
It was wildly, like, if you asked me for a dumb way to learn language, if you asked me to think of the dumbest way I could come up with to learn a language that still, could squeak by the sniff test, I would come up with something that wouldn't be quite as crazy as this.
Yeah, especially that language. Okay, man, I can't even believe you got through that. So if we then jump to you going to your unit, to 10th group, right, your fourth choice as you described it, which is astounding to me. I can't even imagine you being like a Southeast Asian expert, given how much you've done on the European front. That's just sounds like somebody knew you and said, no, this guy's got to be in 10th group. But um,
No, I
as
mean,
you were,
I did it because like everything I've done since then was because, it was all path dependent. Like I went that direction because that's the direction the Army sent me.
through, okay. Um, as you get to the unit, kind of talk me through what that was like going from the conventional, I guess 173rd seems to be even more advanced, I would say, than your typical unit on the conventional side, but still going from there to the SF community. What was the transition like initially?
It was pretty smooth. I mean, I think the people that I worked with in 10th group were really nice people. It was, and I mean, really, the difference is not enormous, like in terms of like, organizational culture and the quality of NCOs. Like I was really, like 173rd is a really special place. I mean, like I said, like most of the bulk of my NCOs in the 173rd ended up being in 10th group.
Yeah.
And it was even a thing in 10th group is no matter how many times you went to combat with 10th group, you always wore your 173rd right shoulder patch. Cause it was like nobody else from other conventional units wore their right shoulder patch, but it was a 173rd thing. Cause it was kind of like because Mike Davis set up our DZ. There would be like young guys in 10th group who would be like, you didn't shoot anybody on your DZ, ha 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 ha. But the dudes that were on the drop zone like knew, they did their job on the drop zone. We did our job on the drop zone. So it's a good way to like kind of shake people down a little bit. There's a good like 173rd Mafia in 10th group.
And then when you arrive to an SF unit, what is I guess as an officer, like what does that transition look like? Do you have to do a staff role for a few months or a year, and then you go into a leadership role, or is nothing guaranteed when you hit the ground?
I think it depends on timing, just like in a conventional unit. But my timing was, so I showed up, and I remember the Halo team from B Company, they like had their eye on me because I had like parachuting experience. I was not interested in being on a Halo team for a bunch of reasons. So me and this guy, John Bly, got there together, and we were basically like the battle captains. So we got there like in January. The battalion deployed for OIF 5 in March. John and I went out in February to sort of get the lay of the land, learn how the OPSEN worked. And the guys there were really nice too. The 5th group guys. I remember the commander was this guy, Chris Miller, who's now Dazdi Solik, I think. And he was just like a really nice, cool, smart guy. And the guy I took over for, his name was Josh Khoury. He was a Lebanese American guy. He was like just really nice and made things, just like explained to me what was going on in a very reasonable and kind way. I don't feel like there was any like, shock. Everything was pretty smooth. I did that for, I don't know, like 3 or 4 months before I went to my team.
And then when did you end up kind of deploying with that team? How much time did you have with them before you were in theater?
So I was already in theater. So I got to theater in February. The team and all the other teams got to theater in March. And then my team, the team that ended up being my team, was sort of like eyeballing the new captains like Matthew McConaughey and Dazed and Confused, and they like the guy they wanted. And they were actually on their team house. So they were advising the recce troop of the Iraqi Special Operations Force. Mm-hmm. So basically all the work that I did was at the same place, the same general geographic area as where the task force headquarters was, where I was working as a battle captain. So it was was pretty, I just like packed up my stuff and walked over to another building and put my stuff down, and that was it.
That was a pretty easy transition there. Then what, I guess just, I'm super interested about what a mission looks like for an SF team. So I've seen when I was in Afghanistan, we would do deliberate ops with some of the teams. So I kind of saw once they had gone through all their planning, we kind of do a joint air ground planning, and then we'd execute, come back and review what happened. But, you know, I was never there when they were kind of suiting up, gearing up, working with the local forces. What, if you could just kind of take me through a generic mission that you guys would run when you were in command? What did that look like? What did it feel like? How many guys were on your team? What were they working on?
So my experience was really odd, I think, because of the fact that we did the recce troop. That also meant that I was the battalion targeting officer. So the team was doing several things. I had two intel sergeants, one of whom was embedded in the Iraqi headquarters and basically was supporting their J2. And then another one was running this big human enterprise. And then we were doing like close target recons that we weren't doing. My guys were training Iraqi dudes to do CTRs. So there was like a lot going on in a bunch of different places. And so, but a typical actual mission, I was never a ground force commander for a mission. It's like my buddy Dre, who was in the 173rd with me, he had another team in my company, and his team was advising the commandos, which I could be sort of analogous to maybe like the Rangers in the U.S. And then there was a rotating SIF, which became the CRF, which I guess is now being disbanded. That was advising the ICTF, which would be like the Iraqi version of the tier 1 units. And actually the XO of that SIF when I first got there was Hagen Scotton, who was a senior at Georgetown when I was a freshman, and was like my mentor when I joined ROTC. But so our role was to like develop the target packages, coordinate them with the Prime Minister's Situation Room, do all the preliminary work, and then we handed it over. So Dre or one of his colleagues from the SIF would be the ground force commander, and I would not every mission, but I would every once in a while just go out like as just a dude on my team as part of the PID package. So we'd have the source, the human source for the mission, and we'd basically just like drive the human source on the mission. The ground force guys would do their stuff, and the PID package would roll in and just make sure we had the right people. And then that would be that. So the actual kinetic component of the mission, I played very, very tiny roles in.
Got it. And so that was kind of an Iraq rotation was how long for you guys? 6 months?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it ended up being like a little bit longer, but I think a typical rotation in those days was 7 months.
Got it. And then you rotated out of that. And then what was your next theater of operations?
So typically you would do like the rhythm that was going on there was 7 months on, 7 months off, 7 months on, 7 months off. But 110, where two of my 173rd NCOs were, the SIF from 110 had not gotten into combat at all since like 2001, and it was 2008 by then. Wow. So they were worried that they were going to miss the war. So some deal was worked out where we I don't know if it was the whole battalion. I think it was the whole battalion stayed, like we basically skipped a rotation and 110 picked up our rotation. And then my company went to Stuttgart and backfilled the CIF. So during that time, we came home. I went to do a bunch of long training. Like I was basically in training for 6 months. I went up to the Pacific Northwest and stayed there for a few months. And then rejoined my team in Germany. And then I had negotiated from the Pacific Northwest to go to Sub-Saharan Africa instead of staying in Germany. So we did a quick trip to Mali, and that was interesting and fun. And then we came back.
Jordan, are you able to talk about, like, in general, some of the ops that you ran in Mali? Because I imagine that's like night and day difference between that and what you saw in Iraq.
Yeah, well, not night and day. There were significant differences, and I really enjoyed Mali, and I would not have predicted the chaos that Mali descended into. Like I feel like I was quite wise to what was going to happen to us in Iraq and Afghanistan, but my brief exposure to Mali left me like much more positive about Mali than I probably should have been. I really enjoyed the military people we worked with. Like just the people in general were really nice. The missions were not that different from what we were doing in Iraq. There was, a training component and a targeting component. And it was, so in Iraq, because the mission was so developed, there was no space for entrepreneurship the way, one of the reasons I enjoyed OIF so much is because OIF1 was that I got to engage in entrepreneurship. Like everything was just ripe in Iraq, right? Like it was
Wild West when you were there.
Yeah. So I had not very much freedom as like I did what the guy before me did and what the guy after me did. Whereas Mali, like I really spoke the language. We had a lot of freedom. It was pretty fun.
Was that more what people would consider the traditional mission of an SF team, kind of like the more entrepreneurial, working with local forces without a more significant U.S. footprint? Is that kind of like what you would imagine SF teams were trained to do?
Yes.
And so what, I don't know, what does that type of mission look like? Is it the Iraq model where it's like every day you kind of have the same thing going on? It sounds like it's not, where it's more diverse, flexible. How did you find like ways to have success in that role in Mali?
Well, it was hard not a lot of people were paying attention to it. So it was hard to gauge. You didn't get a lot of feedback in terms of success. And I don't know if I would describe what we did as successful. It was really brief. I don't think we really screwed anything up terribly. It was, some of the guys basically, I had a whole like new crop of dudes. So it was a good chance for the few senior guys who were remaining to train the junior guys on the sort of basic FID missions, running flat ranges with Malians, figuring out safety stuff, training stuff, communicating with the Malians. I spent a lot of time engaging with the senior leaders in the organization, and then looking around, doing some targeting stuff, some ACME targeting stuff. AQI.
Not necessarily doing deliberate ops with them, but it's truly that like FID, that training.
Yeah. No, we did not do a single real world operation with them.
Yeah. Okay. So you do Mali with them. Then did you do more rotations with the teams, or was that it for your deployments with them?
No, that was it for deployments. We came back from Mali. That was like summer of 2008. Then we did what they called like a legacy skill refresher. And my team was the mountaineering team. So we spent a lot of time in the mountains, which is wonderful. And then And then I went to grad school.
Okay. So just before we transition to that part, what, if you look back, it sounds like from basically that time you jump in 03 to when you leave Mali, what was the kind of closest call you had, or the most kind of dangerous point in that operational part of your career?
I'm so dumb. There were probably a bunch of them that I wasn't even aware of, you know, was like Mr. Magoo or Mr. Magoo. I go through, you go through life like on the edge of disaster. Everything's going great, but the thing that comes immediately to mind as like a moment where I was like, whoa, I could have just died, was one of my earlier missions in Kirkuk that turned into like super fun for me and the platoon. And it was like it ended up being like a recurring activity that we did basically the whole deployment, and meant that me and my guys got to go stay in a hotel in Kurdistan once every couple of weeks. But at the beginning, so my job was to outfit the Kirkuk Police Department with SUVs, sirens, and radios. And the S4 was a dude. So my company commander was really awesome, and he was my raider. The S4 was not awesome, and he wanted to be my raider. So he was always looking for ways to like tell me to do stuff. And this dude, he counseled me. He gave me quarterly counseling, even though he wasn't my raider, but he insisted on doing it anyway. And every time he'd go, Jordan, what does officership mean to you? And every time I told him, it's all the shit that's not NCO shit. But he was like, hey, you know, you got to get, this didn't come from my company commander. It came through him. He's like, you got to get police vehicles for the police department. You're good at that kind of thing. Get police vehicles. And I was like, oh, where do you want me to do that, man? I couldn't like Google it or anything. I mean, I had to really plug into my networks. I remember we were driving down the street and there was like this burnt out hulk of an SUV that some SF dudes got blown up in. And he was like, well, just recover things like that and get them fixed. Like, dude, you gotta be kidding me. So finally there was like this dude who knew a dude who knew a dude. And I ended up with this dude named Saeed Jihad in like a nice neighborhood in downtown Kirkuk. He had like a auto repair shop, you know? And we found like a couple like inoperable vehicles on the side of the road, like towed them over there and was like, hey, you know, how much to get these things fixed? And I was kind of negotiating with him, and this like gunfight erupted on the street that my dudes were involved in. And I think my actions spanned a total of maybe like 9 seconds, and I didn't do anything worth a shit. Like all I did was, my RTO was on top. We didn't have T&Es for our 50 cals. So my RTO was lying on top of the roof of our truck. They were on these little pedestal mounts that had we like rigged them up like before. This was not I didn't know anything about trucks before I took over this platoon. And like somebody like machined these like steel platforms for the heavy weapons to go on, and there were no T&Es. So he had like spun the gun all the way around on this pedestal and was laying on the roof, like the canvas, roof of the truck, and was just blazing away with the 50 cal. So I like grabbed him and told him to stop doing that. And then this Dimo Sanchez from Ecuador was like standing in the middle of the street shooting people. But he was just standing in the middle of the street. So I went out on the street and pulled him behind some cover. And then it all just stopped. But then I got in the truck to call it in on the radio, and I realized like the radio wasn't working. And then I looked out, and Blosser, my RTO, had shot the antenna off the truck with the 50. And then there was like this woody station wagon out in the middle of the street, and it was a civilian who had been like killed in the crossfire or shot in the crossfire. But what I think actually, but then I looked at the wall behind me, And have you ever seen Ali G in the House, like the movie at the beginning where he's like he's getting shot at, and then he walks away, and there's like a silhouette with a big nozzle coming out of it.
Yep.
That's like I felt like that without the nozzle, but there it looked like there was. I was like, wow, how did like none of those? That's crazy.
What had happened?
What?
What had happened?
I'm not absolutely certain, but I think what happened was that there were some dudes that were running from cops, and the cops were chasing the dudes who they of course said were fighting Saddam, but they could have just been teenagers urinating in public. I don't know. And the cops were shooting at the guys who were fleeing from them. And then my guys started like engaging, things, shooting. And so I think it ended up being like a three-way match. But then what happened was then when anybody tried to ask any questions about it, the people in the neighborhood like basically made up this story where they were like, oh, Lieutenant Becker heroically told everyone to get out of the way and he saved all the lives and Lieutenant Becker. So I think it was really just a colossal like set of mistakes that I compounded with like some minor mistakes at the end. And then my inaction and inability to call anybody on the radio and the fact that it took me like 30 seconds to figure out what was going on probably saved lives just from me not doing anything. And then it got, just because I was a nice guy, the people in the neighborhood kind of spun it into, something more reasonable.
Heroic act.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. And then one other thing that comes to mind as you're talking about that before kind of diving into what your transition was out of the ops side would be, if you kind of look back on that operational time again from 2003 to leaving the teams, what point in time do you feel like you were in a place thinking like, this is where I'm supposed to be, like this is why I've done all this is the right place for me, this is exactly what I was trained to do? Did you have one of those moments?
Yeah. I think I had two. Like when I was like in flow, was when we were doing Team Repo at the beginning of OIF1, I felt like sort of all the skills that I brought to the Army and all the skills that the Army had taught me were like in play. And I felt like I was really like I was grooving. And then I think in Mali, I felt pretty in my element.
The autonomy, kind of the mission, language, had all that like converging at once.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, so I think I would just be super curious as you come out of the teams, like you probably had so many decisions and paths you could take, including staying in the ops side. What direction did you go, and why did you choose that route?
So it was pretty easy. It was a family decision. Like Lauren and I were thinking about what to do, a similar couple dynamic to what you described with Val, where, Lauren's already getting sick of playing second fiddle and having to deal with deployments and stuff like that. We want to have kids. I had applied to go teach at West Point because this dude, John Hopkins, who was my Ranger buddy in the mountains, was one of those like genius West Point guys. You know what I mean? Like the guys from West Point that go to Vicenza, like the guys at the top of their class. And he told me, he's like, have you ever heard of the Department of Social Sciences? You should consider teaching there. And I pull a little Write in the Rain green notebook, teach at Department of Social Sciences. So I applied to do that when I was in the Captain's Career Course. And I got accepted to do that. And then Lauren and I talked about transitioning to FAO. They were doing this critical skills retention bonus thing that you probably remember. And I thought, well, we'll take it. That's free money to do, And you remember they were saying like, if you'll stay in the Army for 8 more years, we'll send you to Ranger School. The person that accepts that deal, you don't want to retain that guy. So Lauren told me, don't take the bonus. Wait until you're a Europe fail, because she wanted to be in Europe. And wait till you're teaching at West Point. So we waited till all that came through, and then we made a decision basically at 8 years in the Army. I guess it was 8 years in the Army. Okay, we're probably gonna stay until 20 years in the Army, because I'll do this. The grad school plus West Point would take me through 13 years in the Army, and then at that point, it's the incentives point strongly toward staying. So we made that decision then. I don't think I ever would have regretted it. But when we were here in grad school, Lauren and I were out backcountry skiing, and I was peeing all the time and losing weight. And she got worried about my health. And I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, which basically made me like not deployable. And I had to get med boarded just to stay in the Army.
Wow.
So really if I'd stayed on the operational side and then been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, I don't know what would have, I probably would have just gotten out of the Army.
Yeah. And Jordan, you took the FAO track?
Yeah, I'm a FAO.
Oh man, that's fascinating. Okay. So just mindful of your time and starting to close up here, just a couple questions I wanted to ask that I try to ask everyone. I know you're still in, but kind of looking back at everything and the way you came in, the time you spent in, if you could kind of go back to Jordan in high school or freshman year and you could give some advice, would you tell him to do it all again or take a different path? Or would he be going to George Washington for SEAL training instead?
No, I'm glad. I think I'm dispositionally disinclined to engage in speculation like that, and I'm always I generally don't regret stuff, and I feel like this has been a pretty lucky path. I feel pretty grateful to have been with the people that I've been with, to have had the experiences I've had, and to not be dead or wounded, to be able now to give my kids interesting experiences. It's been a pretty nice. It's been pretty nice.
Yeah. And I remember back in college, you were probably the first person to be tough on me and put me in my place
Really?
Yeah. Because usually people, I think there's a tendency to just kind of be on the nice side, but there were a couple times. So I distinctly remember you talking to me about hey, take responsibility for this action. Don't pass it off on someone else. And it just totally stuck with me. I'm curious from your perspective, is you've taught at West Point, and I know you're going back, you've led in the teams on the infantry side. If you were coaching a new lieutenant or somebody in ROTC or a young NCO, is there any snapshot of advice, if you could only impart one or two things, that you would give them now looking back on your time?
Wow. Be yourself and own what you do.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear you say that. And actually, I think some of the other takeaways that I have from this, just hearing you, how you've gamed the system in certain ways, whether it was with your branch or what you did entrepreneurially, just it's no surprise to me how you've done something like that and been successful at it. So I totally understand that. Then just two more questions. If you were tapped on the shoulder and they said, all right, you and one other person have to go in and do this mission in name your country, who's the one guy or gal that you would take with you into combat?
Definitely Mike Bartlett.
Yeah, your old platoon sergeant.
Yeah. That's the easy question.
No If it wasn't your platoon sergeant and you had to pick someone else, would you be able to pick someone?
Oh man. You know, the next two names that come to mind, it's funny. Like the next two people that come to mind are my first team sergeant in SF, and my senior weapons sergeant in SF. And my senior weapons sergeant in SF was was my closest friend in Colorado. And he was like the best gunfighter ever, and was just generally a good fighter. Like he was just a badass dude, and quite like charming and smooth as well. And you know where he is?
Where?
He's dead.
Oh.
And it's every time I think about him, I think like how easy it is. Like no matter how good you are, like if you play that game for long enough, the probabilities go up.
Oh.
And I thought,
terrible.
Like that's a guy that guy, Dave, is somebody I would always like. He's a guy that I absolutely trusted with my life, and trusted with his life, but we're not always in control, you know?
Yeah. And how about the other team sergeant that you mentioned?
Daryl Utt. He was brilliant. He is brilliant. I talk to him fairly frequently. He's a lovely guy. And both Daryl and Mike gave me the same advice, which is if you ever have to choose between your family and the Army, choose your family.
Yeah.
And both of them, you know, they're both divorced and had, you know, chosen the Army in their younger days in the Army, and I think regretted it. But yeah, Daryl was also a super, super competent guy. Much more like Mike. Mike's like an interpersonal genius and a physical genius. But I think he has like severe dyslexia.
Wow.
Because what I think, I've never like talked to him about it, but my guess is he's like a high IQ person that just like he doesn't read. Like he does not like to read. And do you remember Charles King from Georgetown?
No.
He was the head of the government department there.
Yeah. Sorry.
He was my thesis advisor, and he gave me a biography of Ataturk for, you know, like graduation as like your thesis gift or whatever. Mm-hmm. And Mike really played the Turkish thing. Like that was part of his shtick with girls. So he borrowed this book from me, but he never read anything out of it. And he'd like go lock himself in the bathroom and be like, and he could kind of speak pretty good Italian, right? So he could go over to girls, and he'd call me up and be like, hey, so what was Ataturk's relationship with Ahmed Pasha again? Like, whereas Daryl was much more like Daryl's like a more of an intellect, you know, could really write well and was an intellect, but also was super gunfighter, not a paragon of fitness at all times. But yeah, I would always trust Daryl.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess just wrapping up then, Jordan, like you are constantly publishing articles in different areas. I would just ask briefly, like what's top of mind for you now in your, you know, if you're okay, talking about this. I don't want to get into anything too sensitive, but like what's top of mind for you going on right now with what you're writing, and where can people find that type of work that you're doing?
Well, that's the least sensitive thing in the world because it's already been cleared and it's out there. What the kind of writing I do is really boring, right? Like it's a lot of like econometrics and stuff like that. It's not super exciting. But honestly, when you ask about like when I'm in my element, I feel more in my element researching I'm than even in my most in my element moments as a, you know, in the operational world. So I spent this afternoon working on, I lucked out, and one of the world's best defense economists we're co-authoring a paper together. So I spent the afternoon like trying to reverse engineer his math, and it's really hard. But I love it. I get a lot of joy out of that. And I feel like we probably pass our physical prime, and like not our mental prime, but like in terms of like mental quickness and agility and like the combination of mental and physical agility and quickness. I feel like most of us, and certainly me, pass our prime earlier than we recognize in that area. And I feel like even, incurable disease aside, I feel like I can make a lot more contributions. The sort of like force multiplier is much higher with my research now than I would be doing anything else. So I get tons of joy out of it. And I do have a profile on Google Scholar. So if anybody wants to read my work on Google Scholar, it's there. But I can't imagine there are a lot of people who are both interested in podcasts about war stories and my crappy econometrics.
Got it. And then if you can, like your next assignment is back to West Point, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And so how was that kind of like, if you could have picked anything, that was going to be it?
Yeah. I mean, I love being a FAO, and my FAO assignments have been wonderful. My family loves living in Europe. We had a great time in Brussels. Yeah, it's probably time for the kids to get closer to the family and learn how to be American. Ava was actually born in New York City and is very proud of being a New Yorker and is looking forward to going back to New York. Luca's only been to the United States like twice in his life, I think.
Wow.
So it's gonna be good to be back in the States. I love like the people. I've never been in 173rd and 10th Group anywhere. I've never been around such talented people as I was in the social sciences department. And I've always wanted to go back to that. Like when you're the dumbest person in a room, it can be intimidating, but it's also pretty exciting. You know that Warren Buffett quote, when you're at a poker table and you can't identify the patsy, you're the patsy?
Yeah.
That's how I feel. That's how I feel working there. And to me at least, that's a really exciting feeling, because like everybody, you're being pulled up by everybody around you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I really appreciate the time, man. I just wish you great luck for the rest of your time in Paris and then your trip back to West Point. It was great catching up again.
It was wonderful to talk to you. Thanks for reaching out, and I hope I'll get to see you again in California.
Yep. Sounds good, man.
Enjoy that redwood behind you.
I hope you enjoyed this combat story. If you want to tell your own story, go to combatstory.com. If you know someone we should interview, send me their info at ryan@combatstory.com. Hearing these stories can be tough or bring back your own memories. If you're battling PTSD, please call the Veteran Crisis Line at 1-800-273-8255. 273-8255. Stay safe.